Welcoming you lovely human beings. This is Imperfect Progress with your host Hennessy, a safe space where we dive into the experiences, feelings, and tools that make up a full and flawed life. Today we're talking about vulnerability. I hear the word vulnerability used a lot. It's become kind of a buzzword in our culture. You might have your own definition of vulnerability, but I'm going to share with you what it means to me so that we can be on the same page throughout this episode. To me, vulnerability means honestly sharing how you feel or a piece of your story in a way that sets yourself and others free from that lie that I'm the only one who has felt or thought or experienced this and I have to hide it to be loved. It's purposeful, helpful honesty. Now, it doesn't have to be your deepest secret to be vulnerable. It doesn't have to be a set-apart event for you to practice vulnerability. And it's not a competition of who experienced more or worse trauma or who's hurting the most or whose life is the most challenging. It's really just being honest with ourselves and others so that we can connect with ourselves and others in a healthier way. I have a lifetime of practice of being a very curated kind of vulnerable. I picked feelings and memories that were real, but not too dark, and I would filter them for my audience. Now, in some moments, that might be helpful for you and your listener, depending on the level of trust and intimacy that you have with them. But I was doing this with everyone. I was doing this with my therapist, with my mom, with my best friend, and even with myself. For most of my life, I truly believed that if I wasn't the most morally upstanding, perfectionistic, A triple plus, say yes to everything girl, then people would not love me as much, or maybe at all. So I intentionally crafted who I was on the outside for others to see and experience. This is called masking, and my two biggest masks were perfectionism and people-pleasing. So I got straight A's with this positive, I can do anything attitude, while on the inside, I lived in constant exhaustion and a fear of failure. I said yes to every volunteer opportunity, every team and club and band and event, because I just love people. Which is a half-truth. I really do love people. And I'm also afraid that if I don't please the people, then they will be disappointed and they will leave me. So when I spent time with people, I was unconsciously checking the expectations that I thought they had of me and playing into that role very specifically. So these are not things people told me they expected of me. These were things I believed. These are expectations I created for myself, for them. Very creative, points for creativity, but not a helpful way to walk through life. So this kind of sounds like I was simultaneously such a good girl who loved people and yet very fake and scared. And that's hard to admit because I was being me the only way that I knew how, and I wasn't aware of how that might hurt myself and hurt other people in the moment and down the road. So it's kind of a hard thing to accept about yourself when you see, kind of the shadows that you were walking with and you didn't even know they were there. Now, the positives of those masks that people admired were truly parts of me. I really did love people. I do love, pursuing things with excellence. I do love making other people smile and helping them. I do love being involved in things. But I took them to this extreme level that said, if I'm not this way, then my identity is gone. And people will not know me or love me. So those are parts of me, but they were only parts. And the other parts of me that needed acknowledgement and affection, I had just tucked them away inside. And I felt like I was being ripped and pulled between my inner reality and my outward persona. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the movie She's the Man. It's one of my favorites, which marks me as a major zillennial torn between two generations. But if you have seen She's the Man, then you remember the scene where Amanda Bynes is at the carnival, and every 5 seconds she has to change her clothes so that she can alternate between being herself as this like upcoming, Southern belle, and then also being her brother, who, is a soccer player and goes to this new school. That scene really hits home more than it probably should, because I just felt so torn, like I was two different people, or a different person in every environment that I was in, and I had to sort of chameleon to fit that crowd instead of just always being myself. So to date myself again as the little preteen that I was, I sometimes feel like a lot of us are living a much less glamorous version of Hannah Montana, with our inner Miley just longing to be seen and be loved, but too scared that people only like us when we're rock stars. And sharing our true selves with others, the beautiful and the cracked bits, can be terrifying, but also really freeing. And that kind of double life dynamic is not sustainable. So for that reason, some of the most liberating, yet very uncomfortable experiences of my life have been sharing pieces of my story with loved ones, and sometimes strangers, only to find that most people's love truly is unconditional and full of acceptance. People are way more understanding than we give them credit for. And more often than not, people have felt or experienced something very similar to us that they've just also been afraid to share. So we all feel like we're the only one, like we're alone. And when we're vulnerable, we tear down that wall because it's not true. And when a person looks you in the eyes and they declare, there is nothing you have said or done, or that you could say or do that would make me love you any less, something inside of us just melts. It's like your heart turns into like magma in the fire of their love. And then when it finally cools down, it's way stronger than it was before. And if you want to take a little nerdy sidebar and go find out why I apparently thought that metaphor was fitting, go Google igneous rocks. But on the other hand, when you realize that a person only loved you if fill in the blank, it feels crushing. It's a whole different kind of melting. And the truth is that some people are not helpful or healthy connections, and we have to let them go. And losing people can be a part of vulnerability. It's a risk. I've lost people to my truth, and it hurts. It leaves a hole and a scar, but the healing that comes afterward can move you forward into new and more authentic connections. The goal along the whole path of vulnerability is to find people, for a moment, or a season, or forever, who see you and love you and accept all of your parts. We need people who will listen to understand and still help us even when they don't fully understand. We need people who comfort us and who also challenge us. We don't need woo girls and yes men. We need, I'm in it with you, and I want what's best for you, and I trust you will learn what that is and communicate it with me, people. So find your people. Find your tribe. Find the ones who love your Hannah and your Miley, your Eeyore, Piglet, Rabbit, Tigger, and your Pooh. Be your full self. Be more than just a part, because all of you is who you were made to be, and every bit of you is necessary and worthy of love. So I suppose now it's time for me to get specific and practice vulnerability with all of you. I really started to understand the value of trusting others with my whole self when I was in college. I had experienced anxiety and depression and even wishing my life would end since I was a young teen. These thoughts started to resurface and climax my senior year of college. I think as humans, we don't always handle change well, and I especially had an aversion to change. I was scared about graduation. I was scared to leave behind my safe and comfortable community. I was scared to embrace this new, big, unknown world. I was excited about the future and the things I thought I would do, and I was also so afraid of how to do it and of doing it alone. So I had these huge feelings that I didn't know how to feel, so I tried to hide them. But then they just ate me from the inside out. I would stare out my window, sitting on my couch or my bed, or even just standing in our kitchen and dining room. I would stare out my window for hours, just looking at a parking lot full of cars and watching people walk across campus and watching people drive down the street. And I was just paralyzed by my feelings, by my thoughts about the future, by my thoughts of my inadequacies. And I actually started having really intense chest pain. I honestly went through a phase where I thought I had developed some kind of heart condition, and I went to the doctor and got different heart tests. I got an EKG. I wore a heart monitor around campus for 3 days just to try and record one of these episodes. And I remember the doctor asking me, after the results all came back negative, everything was clear, I had a healthy heart. I remember the doctor asking me if I felt, nervous about anything or anxious or upset, and if these could be symptoms of an anxiety attack. And I said no, because I was so disconnected from myself and so focused on being my perfect and positive persona that I couldn't fathom having an anxiety disorder that ran so deep that it had started to affect me physically. So one day, my feelings just burst out of me. I lived in an on-campus house with 8 other lovely women. They were my dearest friends, and I still care about them so deeply. And I really didn't want them to see me fully unraveled. I cried all the time. I am a person who is sensitive. I have big feelings. But a lot of times, I projected those feelings onto, kind of existential darkness in the world and tragedies in all of humanity. And I didn't want them to see me fully unraveled about myself. I felt shame and I felt guilt for feeling so hopeless and scared and having no answers about how to fix myself. So I went upstairs into my room, which I shared with my roommate I had since freshman year, and I walked into our little closet and I closed the door and I turned off the light and I sat on the ground and I wept as silently as I could. However, if you have ever tried to hold your feelings in for a very long time and then finally let them loose, sobs are just not silent. You can't make them silent, no matter how hard you try. I also underestimated, as usual, how much these people loved and cared for me. So one of my housemates came looking for me, and she found me. She helped me into another room. There was a room off the side of mine that had this slanted ceiling, and it was just a goofy little room, but we'd strung up Christmas lights. She turned them on. She started playing some of our favorite music on her phone. She left the room, came back with 2 coloring books, a package of colored pencils, and she just hugged me and then started coloring. And she knew I would talk when I was ready. And eventually I did. So I told her about my fears. And I told her about the darkness that I was feeling and that was just consuming my mind and all of the uncertainty. And I told her how it wasn't new. I'd been feeling this way for years. And she wasn't offended. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't uncomfortable. She just listened, hugged me again, held me while I got more of my tears out. And she might have given me some advice because she's a very wise woman, but I honestly don't remember that part. All I know is that she made me feel like I wasn't a wretched monster for feeling that way or for thinking dark thoughts. And she made me feel loved and validated and like I belonged just as I was. And then somehow, after a few minutes of coloring and random chat, we ended up laughing, like full throttle, not breathing, can't contain ourselves laughing. And we went downstairs and we had dinner with our housemates and we did homework and complained about classes and kept living our lives. And I wasn't healed after that. I wasn't forever honest and vulnerable after that. I didn't immediately get the help I needed and turn my life around. It would be another few years before I faced the full extent of my shadows and scars, before I accepted therapy and chose medicine and set boundaries. But I remember that moment because in my being vulnerable, I was able to make it through that day. Because I was honest, my friend could love me the way I needed to be loved, and I was free to keep living. Over the years, I have had more moments like this. I started learning to be honest with myself and others, and not just sharing enough so it sounded like I was working on stuff while actually hiding the pieces I thought were too dark or shameful to share. And speaking these truths out loud led me to a next step of learning how to notice my unhelpful thinking patterns. And once I could notice these feelings and these thoughts, that set me on a path to learn how to regulate my emotions and my nervous system so I could face the patterns and reframe them, replacing them with healthier patterns. We have the power to change our minds and to change our lives. Our brains are amazing. I don't know if you've heard the word neuroplasticity. Look it up. Go listen to Cleaning Up the Mental Mess by Dr. Caroline Leaf, because our minds are incredible. But we cannot fully embrace a new way forward and start building these new paths if we can't be honest about where we are right now. Maybe you need to start by being honest with yourself. Maybe your starting point is sharing your truth with someone you trust. Maybe you need to seek a professional listening ear outside of your circle in a safe space where you can start being yourself and letting it all out. However you choose to start, just take one step. Take one step this week. Be vulnerable, because the freedom and growth that come down the road outweigh the discomfort and risk in the moment. Thanks so much for listening. Please hit follow and share this podcast with anyone and everyone who is looking for community in a complicated life. Join me next week where we'll take a crash course in coping skills. And remember, love, shaky baby steps are still progress.